Part 1. The Fifth Stage. Now as Christian went on his way, he came to a little ascent, which was cast up on purpose that pilgrims might see before them. Up there, therefore, Christian went, and looking forward, he saw Faithful before him upon his journey. Then said Christian aloud, "Ho, ho, so ho, stay, and I will be your companion." At that Faithful looked behind him, to whom Christian cried again, "Stay, stay, till I come up to you." But Faithful answered, "No, I am upon my life, and the avenger of blood is behind me." At this Christian was somewhat moved, and putting to all his strength he quickly got up with Faithful, and did also overrun him, so the last was first. Then did Christian vaingloriously smile, because he had gotten the start of his brother, but not taking good heed to his feet, he suddenly stumbled and fell, and could not rise again until Faithful came up to help him. Then I saw in my dream they went very lovingly on together, and had sweet discourse of all the things that had happened to them in their pilgrimage. And thus Christian began. Christian. My honoured and well-beloved brother Faithful, I am glad that I have overtaken you, and that God has so tempered our spirits that we can walk as companions in this so pleasant a path. Faithful. I had thought, my dear friend, to have had your company quite from our town, but you did get the start of me, wherefore I was forced to come this much of the way alone. Christian. How long did you stay in the city of destruction before you set out after me on your pilgrimage? Faithful. Till I could stay no longer, for there was a great talk presently after you were gone out, that our city would, in a short time, with fire from heaven, be burnt down to the ground. Christian. What, did your neighbours talk so? Faithful. Yes, it was for a while in everybody's mouth. Christian. What, and did no more of them but you come out to escape the danger? Faithful. Though there was, as I said, a great talk thereabout, yet I do not think they did firmly believe it. For in the heat of the discourse I heard some of them deridingly speak of you, and of your desperate journey, for so they called this your pilgrimage. But I did believe, and do still, that the end of our city will be with fire and brimstone from above, and therefore I have made my escape. Christian. Did you hear no talk of neighbour Pliable? Faithful. Yes, Christian, I heard that he followed you till he came to the Slough of Despond, whereas some said he fell in, but he would not be known to have so done. But I am sure he was soundly bedabbled with that kind of dirt. Christian. And what said the neighbours to him? Faithful. He hath since his going back been had greatly in derision, and that among all sorts of people. Some do mock and despise him, and scarce will any set him on work. He is now 7 times worse than if he had never gone out of the city. Christian. But why should they be so set against him, since they also despise the way that he forsook? Faithful. Oh, they say, hang him, he is a turncoat. He was not true to his profession. I think God has stirred up even his enemies to hiss at him, and make him a proverb, because he hath forsaken the way. Jeremiah 29:18 and 19. Christian. Had you no talk with him before you came out? Faithful. I met him once in the streets, but he leered away on the other side, as one ashamed of what he had done. So I spake not to him. Christian. Well, at my first setting out, I had hopes of that man, but now I fear he will perish in the overthrow of the city. For it has happened to him according to the true proverb, the dog is turned to his vomit again, and the sow that was washed through her wallowing in the mire. 2 Peter 2:22. Faithful. These are my fears of him too, but who can hinder that which will be? Christian. Well, neighbour Faithful, said Christian, let us leave him, and talk of things that more immediately concern ourselves. Tell me now what you have met with in the ways you came, for I know you have met with some things, or else it may be writ for a wonder. Faithful. I escaped the slough that I perceive you fell into, and got up to the gate without that danger. Only I met with one whose name was Wanton, that had like to have done me mischief. Christian. It was well you escaped her net. Joseph was hard put to it by her, and he escaped her as you did, but it had like to have cost him his life. Genesis 39:11-13. But what did she do to you? Faithful. You cannot think but that you know something. What a flattering tongue she had. She lay at me hard to turn aside with her, promising me all manner of content. Christian. Nay, she did not promise you the content of a good conscience. Faithful. You know what I mean. All carnal and fleshly content. Christian. Thank God that you escaped her. The board of the Lord shall fall into her pit. Proverbs 22:14. Nay, I know not whether I did wholly escape her or no. Christian. Why, I trow you did not consent to her desires. Faithful. No, not to defile myself, for I remembered an old writing that I had seen, which said, Her steps take hold on hell. Proverbs 5:5. So I shut mine eyes, because I would not be bewitched with her looks. Job 31:1. Then she railed on me, and I went my way. Christian. Did you meet with no other assault as you came? Faithful. When I came to the foot of the hill called Difficulty, I met with a very aged man, who asked me what I was and whither bound. I told him that I was a pilgrim going to the celestial city. Then said the old man, Thou lookest like an honest fellow. Wilt thou be content to dwell with me for the wages that I shall give thee? Then I asked his name and where he dwelt. He said his name was Adam the First, and that he dwelt in the town of Deceit. Ephesians 4:22. I asked him then what was his work, and what the wages that he would give. He told me that his work was many delights, and his wages that I should be his heir at last. I further asked him what house he kept, and what other servants he had. So he told me that his house was maintained with all the dainties of the world, and that his servants were those of his own begetting. Then I asked how many children he had. He said that he had but 3 daughters, the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life. 1 John 2:16. And that I should marry them if I would. Then I asked how long time he would have me live with him, and he told me, as long as he lived himself. Christian. Well, and what conclusion came the old man and you to at last? Faithful. Why, at first I found myself somewhat inclinable to go with the man, for I thought he spake very fair. But looking in his forehead, as I talked with him, I saw there written, Put off the old man with his deeds. Christian. And how then? Faithful. Then it came burning hot into my mind that whatever he said, and however he flattered, when he got me home to his house he would sell me for a slave. So I bid him forbear to talk, for I would not come near the door of his house. Then he reviled me and told me that he would send such a one after me, that should make my way bitter to my soul. So I turned to go away from him, but just as I turned myself to go thence, I felt him take hold of my flesh, and give me such a deadly twitch back, that I thought he had pulled part of me after himself. This made me cry, O wretched man! Romans 7:24. So I went on my way up the hill. Now when I had got above halfway up, I looked behind me, and saw one coming after me, swift as the wind. So he overtook me just about the place where the settle stands. Christian. Just there, said Christian, did I sit down to rest me, but being overcome with sleep, I there lost this roll out of my bosom. Faithful. But, good brother, hear me out. So soon as the man overtook me, it was but a word and a blow, for down he knocked me and laid me for dead. But when I was a little come to myself again, I asked him wherefore he served me so. He said because of my secret inclining to Adam the first, and with that he struck me another deadly blow on the breast, and beat me down backward, so I lay at his foot as dead as before. So when I came to myself again, I cried him mercy, but he said, I know not how to show mercy, and with that he knocked me down again. He had doubtless made an end of me, but that one came by and bid him forbear. Christian. Who was that bid him forbear? Faithful. I did not know him at first, but as he went by, I perceived the holes in his hands and in his side. Then I concluded that he was our Lord. So I went up the hill. Christian. That man that overtook you was Moses. He spareth none, neither knoweth he how to show mercy to those that transgress the law. Faithful. I know it very well. It was not the first time that he has met with me. 'Twas he that came to me when I dwelt securely at home, and that told me he would burn my house over my head if I stayed there. Christian. But did you not see the house that stood there on the top of the hill, on the side of which Moses met you? Faithful. Yes, and the lions too, before I came at it. But for the lions I think they were asleep, for it was about noon, and because I had so much of the day before me, I passed by the porter, and came down the hill. Christian. He told me indeed that he saw you go by, but I wished you had called at the house, for they would have showed you so many rarities that you would scarce have forgot them to the day of your death. But pray tell me, did you meet nobody in the valley of humility? Faithful. Yes, I met with one discontent, who would willingly have persuaded me to go back again with him. His reason was for that the valley was altogether without honour. He told me, moreover, that to go there was the way to disoblige all my friends, as pride, arrogancy, self-conceit, worldly glory with others, who he knew, as he said, would be very much offended if I made such a fool of myself as to wade through this valley. Christian. Well, and how did you answer him? Faithful. I told him that, although all these that he named might claim a kindred of me, and that rightly, for indeed they were my relations according to the flesh, yet since I became a pilgrim they have disowned me, and I also have rejected them, and therefore they were to me now no more than if they had never been of my lineage. I told him, moreover, that as to this valley, he had quite misrepresented the thing, for before honour is humility, and a haughty spirit before a fall. Therefore, said I had rather go through this valley to the honour that was so accounted by the wisest, than choose that which he esteemed most worthy of our affections. Christian. Met you with nothing else in that valley? Faithful. Yes, I met with shame, but of all the men that I met with on my pilgrimage he, I think, bears the wrong name. The other would be said, nay, after a little argumentation, and somewhat else, but this bold-faced shame would never have done. Christian. Why? What did he say to you? Faithful. What? Why, he objected against religion itself. He said it was a pitiful, low, sneaking business for a man to mind religion. He said that a tender conscience was an unmanly thing, and that for a man to watch over his words and ways, so as to tie up himself from that hectoring liberty that the brave spirits of the times accustom themselves unto, would make him the ridicule of the times. He objected also that but few of the mighty, rich, or wise were ever of my opinion, nor any of them neither before they were persuaded to be fools, and to be of a voluntary fondness to venture the loss of all for nobody knows what. 1 Corinthians 1:26, 3:18, Philippians 3:7-9, John 7:48. He moreover objected the base and low estate and condition of those that were chiefly the pilgrims of the times in which they lived, also their ignorance and want of understanding in all natural science. Yea, he did hold me to it at that rate also, about a great many more things than here I relate, as that it was a shame to sit whining and mourning under a sermon, and a shame to come sighing and groaning home, that it was a shame to ask my neighbour forgiveness for petty faults, or to make restitution where I have taken from any. He said also that religion made a man grow strange to the great, because of a few vices, which he called by finer names, and made him own and respect the base, because of the same religious fraternity. And is not this, said he, a shame? Christian. And what did you say to him? Faithful. Say? I could not tell what to say at first. Yea, he put me so to it that my blood came up in my face. Even this shame fetched it up, and had almost beat me quite off. But at last I began to consider that that which is highly esteemed among men is had in abomination with God. Luke 16:15. And I thought again, this shame tells me what men are, but he tells me nothing what God or the word of God is. And I thought, moreover, that at the day of doom we shall not be doomed to death or life, according to the hectoring spirits of the world, but according to the wisdom and law of the highest. Therefore, thought I, what God says is best is indeed best, though all the men in the world are against it. Seeing then that God prefers his religion, seeing God prefers a tender conscience, seeing they that make themselves fools for the kingdom of heaven are wisest, and that the poor man that loveth Christ is richer than the greatest man in the world that hates him. Shame, depart, thou art an enemy to my salvation. Shall I entertain thee against my sovereign Lord? How then shall I look him in the face at his coming? Mark 8:38. Should I now be ashamed of his ways and servants, how can I expect the blessing? But indeed this shame was a bold villain. I could scarcely shake him out of my company. Yea, he would be haunting of me, and continually whispering in my ear with some one or other of the infirmities that attend religion. But at last I told him that it was but in vain to attempt farther in this business, for those things that he disdained, in those did I see most glory. And so at last I got past this importunate one, and when I had shaken him off, then I began to sing. The trials that those men do meet withal, that are obedient to the heavenly call, are manifold and suited to the flesh, and come and come and come again afresh, that now or sometime else we by them may be taken, overcome, and cast away. O let the pilgrims then be vigilant, and quit themselves like men. Christian. I am glad, my brother, that thou didst withstand this villain so bravely. For of all, as thou sayest, I think he has the wrong name. For he is so bold as to follow us in the streets, and to attempt to put us to shame before all men, that is, to make us ashamed of that which is good. But if he was not himself audacious, he would never attempt to do as he does. But let us still resist him, for, notwithstanding all his bravadoes, he promoteth the fool and none else. The wise shall inherit glory, said Solomon, but shame shall be the promotion of fools. Proverbs 3:35. Faithful, I think we must cry to him for help against shame, that would have us to be valiant for truth upon the earth. Christian. You say true, but did you meet nobody else in that valley? Faithful. No, not I, for I had sunshine all the rest of the way through that, and also through the valley of the shadow of death. Christian. 'Twas well for you. I am sure it fared far otherwise with me. I had for a long season, as soon almost as I entered into that valley, a dreadful combat with that foul fiend Apollyon. Yea, I thought verily he would have killed me, especially when he got me down and crushed me under him, as if he would have crushed me to pieces. For as he threw me, my sword fell out of my hand. Nay, he told me he was sure of me. But I cried to God, and he heard me, and delivered me out of all my troubles. Then I entered into the valley of the shadow of death, and had no light for almost half the way through it. I thought I should have been killed there over and over. But at last daybreak, and the sun rose, and I went through that which was behind me with far more ease and quiet. Moreover, I saw in my dream that as they went on, Faithful, as he chanced to look on one side, saw a man whose name was Talkative, walking at a distance beside them, for in this place there was room enough for them all to walk. He was a tall man, and something more comely at a distance than at hand. To this man Faithful addressed himself in this manner. Faithful. Friend, whither away? Are you going to the heavenly country? Talkative. I am going to the same place. Faithful. That is well. Then I hope we shall have your good company. Talkative. With a very good will I be your companion. Faithful. Come on then, and let us go together, and let us spend our time in discoursing of things that are profitable. Talkative. To talk of things that are good to me is very acceptable, with you or with any other, and I am glad that I have met with those that incline to so good a work. For, to speak the truth, there are but few who care thus to spend their time as they are in their travels, but choose much rather to be speaking of things to no profit, and this hath been a trouble to me. Faithful. That is indeed a thing to be lamented, for what things so worthy of the use of the tongue and mouth of men on earth, as are the things of the God of heaven? Talkative. I like you wonderful well, for your saying is full of conviction. And I will add, what thing is so pleasant, and what so profitable, as to talk of the things of God? What thing so pleasant, that is, if a man hath any delights in things that are wonderful? For instance, if a man doth delight to talk of the history or the mystery of things, or if a man doth love to talk of miracles, wonders, or signs, where shall he find things recorded so delightful and so sweetly penned, as in the Holy Scripture? Faithful. That is true, but to be profited by such things in our talk should be our chief design. Talkative. That's it that I said, for to talk of such things is most profitable, for by so doing a man may get knowledge of many things, as of the vanity of earthly things, and the benefit of things above. Thus in general, but more particularly, by this a man may learn the necessity of the new birth, the insufficiency of our works, the need of Christ's righteousness, etc. Besides, by this a man may learn what it is to repent, to believe, to pray, to suffer, or the like. By this also man may learn what are the great promises and consolations of the gospel to his own comfort. Farther, by this a man may learn to refute false opinions, to vindicate the truth, and also to instruct the ignorant. Faithful. All this is true, and glad am I to hear these things from you. Talkative. Alas, the want of this is the cause that so few understand the need of faith, and the necessity of a work of grace in their soul in order to eternal life, but ignorantly live in the works of the law, by which a man can by no means obtain the kingdom of heaven. Faithful. But by your leave, heavenly knowledge of these is the gift of God. No man attaineth to them by human industry, or only by the talk of them. Talkative. All this I know very well, for a man can receive nothing except it be given him from heaven. All is of grace, not of works. I could give you 100 scriptures for the confirmation of this. Faithful. Well then, said Faithful, what is that one thing that we shall at this time found our discourse upon? Talkative. What you will. I will talk of things heavenly or things earthly, things moral or things evangelical, things sacred or things profane, things past or things to come, things foreign or things at home, things more essential or things circumstantial, provided that all be done to our profit. Faithful. Now did Faithful begin to wonder, and stepping to Christian, for he walked all this while by himself, he said to him but softly, What a brave companion have we got! Surely this man will make a very excellent pilgrim. Christian. At this Christian modestly smiled and said, This man with whom you are so taken will beguile with this tongue of his 20 of them that know him not. Faithful. Do you know him then? Christian. Know him? Yes, better than he knows himself. Faithful. Pray, what is he? Christian. His name is Talkative. He dwelleth in our town. I wondered that you should be a stranger to him, only I consider that our town is large. Faithful. Whose son is he, and whereabout doth he dwell? Christian. He is the son of one Saywell. He dwelt in Prating Row, and he is known to all that are acquainted with him by the name of Talkative of Prating Row. And notwithstanding his fine tongue, he is but a sorry fellow. Faithful. Well, he seems to be a very pretty man. Christian. That is, to them that have not a thorough acquaintance with him, for he is best abroad. Near home he is ugly enough. Your saying that he is a pretty man brings to my mind what I have observed in the work of a painter, whose pictures show best at a distance, but very near more unpleasing. Faithful. But I am ready to think you do but jest because you smiled. Christian. God forbid that I should jest, though I smiled, in this matter, or that I should accuse any falsely. I will give you a further discovery of him. This man is for any company, and for any talk. As he talketh now with you, so will he talk when he is on the ale-bench. And the more drink he hath in his crown, the more of these things he hath in his mouth. Religion hath no place in his heart, or house, or conversation. All he hath lieth in his tongue, and his religion is to make a noise therewith. Faithful. Say you so? Then am I in this man greatly deceived. Christian. Deceived, you may be sure of it. Remember the proverb, they say and do not. But the kingdom of God is not in word, but in power. Matthew 23:3, 1 Corinthians 4:20. He talketh of prayer, of repentance, of faith, and of the new birth, but he knows but only to talk of them. I have been in his family, and have observed him both at home and abroad, and I know what I say of him is the truth. His house is as empty of religion as the white of an egg is of savour. There is there neither prayer nor sign of repentance for sin. Yea, the brute and his kind serves God far better than he. He is the very stain, reproach, and shame of religion to all that know him. Romans 2:24 and 25. It can hardly have a good word in all that end of the town where he dwells through him. Thus say the common people that know him, a saint abroad and a devil at home. His poor family finds it so. He is such a churl, such a railer at, and so unreasonable with his servants that they neither know how to do for or speak to him. Men that have any dealings with him say it is better to deal with a Turk than with him, for fairer dealings they shall have at their hands. This talkative, if it be possible, will go beyond them, defraud, beguile, and overreach them. Besides, he brings up his sons to follow his steps, and if he finds in any of them a foolish timorousness, for so he calls the first appearance of a tender conscience, he calls them fools and blockheads, and by no means will employ them in much, or speak to their commendation before others. For my part, I am of opinion that he has, by his wicked life, caused many to stumble and fall, and will be, if God prevent not, the ruin of many more. Faithful. Well, my brother, I am bound to believe you, not only because you say you know him, but also because, like a Christian, you make your reports of men. For I cannot think that you speak these things of ill will, but because it is even so as you say. Christian. Had I known him no more than you, I might, perhaps, have thought of him as at the first you did. Yea, had I received this report at their hands only that are enemies to religion, I should have thought it had been a slander, a lot that often falls from bad men's mouths upon good men's names and professions. But all these things, yea, and a great many more as bad, of my knowledge, I can prove him guilty of. Besides, good men are ashamed of him. They can neither call him brother nor friend. The very naming of him among them makes them blush, if they know him. Faithful. Well, I see that seeing and doing are two things, and hereafter I shall better observe this distinction. Christian. They are two things indeed, and are as diverse as are the soul and the body. For as the body without the soul is but a dead carcass, So saying, if it be alone, is but a dead carcass also. The soul of religion is the practical part. Pure religion and undefiled before God and the Father is this: to visit the fatherless and widows in their affliction, and to keep himself unspotted from the world. James 1:27. See also verses 22 to 26. This talkative is not aware of. He thinks that hearing and saying will make a good Christian, and thus he deceiveth his own soul. Hearing is but as the sowing of the seed. Talking is not sufficient to prove that fruit is indeed in the heart and life. And let us assure ourselves that at the day of doom men shall be judged according to their fruits. Matthew 13:23. It will not be said then, did you believe? But, were you doers or talkers only? And accordingly shall they be judged. The end of the world is compared to our harvest. Matthew 13:30. And you know men at harvest regard nothing but fruit. Not that anything can be accepted that is not of faith, but I speak this to show you how insignificant the profession of talkative will be at that day. Faithful. This brings to my mind that of Moses, by which he describeth the beast that is clean. Leviticus 11, Deuteronomy 14. He is such an one that parteth the hoof and cheweth the cud. Not that parteth the hoof only, or that cheweth the cud only. The hare cheweth the cud, but yet is unclean, because he parteth not the hoof. And this truly resembleth talkative. He cheweth the cud, he seeketh knowledge. He cheweth upon the word, but he divideth not the hoof. He parteth not with the way of sinners, but, as the hare, he retaineth the foot of the dog or bear, and therefore he is unclean. Christian. You have spoken, for aught I know, the true gospel sense of these texts, and I will add another thing. Paul calleth some men, yea, and those great talkers too, sounding brass and tinkling cymbals. 1 Corinthians 13:1 and 3. That is, he expounds them in another place, things without life-giving sound. 1 Corinthians 14:7. Things without life, that is, without the true faith and grace of the gospel, and consequently things that shall never be placed in the kingdom of heaven among those that are the children of life, though they sound by their talk, be as if it were the tongue or voice of an angel. Faithful. Well, I was not so fond of his company at first, but I am as sick of it now. What shall we do to be rid of him? Christian. Take my advice and do as I bid you, and you shall find that he will soon be sick of your company too, except God shall touch his heart and turn it. Faithful. What would you have me to do? Christian. Why, go to him, and enter into some serious discourse about the power of religion, and ask him plainly, when he is approved of it, for that he will, whether this thing be set up in his heart, house, or conversation. Faithful. Then Faithful stepped forward again, and said to Talkative, Come, what cheer? How is it now? Talkative. Thank you, well. I thought we should have had a great deal of talk by this time. Faithful. Well, if you will, we will fall to it now. And since you left it with me to state the question, let it be this: how doth the saving grace of God discover itself when it is in the heart of man? Talkative. I perceive, then, that our talk must be about the power of things. Well, it is a very good question, and I shall be willing to answer you, and take my answer in brief thus. First, where the grace of God is in the heart, it causeth there a great outcry against sin. Secondly, Faithful. Nay, hold, let us consider of one at once. I think you should rather say, it shows itself by inclining the soul to abhor its sin. Talkative. Why, what difference is there between crying out against and abhorring of sin? Faithful. Oh, a great deal. A man may cry out against sin of policy, but he cannot abhor it but by virtue of a godly antipathy against it. I have heard many cry out against sin in the pulpit. Who yet can abide it well enough in the heart, house, and conversation? Genesis 39:15. Joseph's mistress cried out with a loud voice, as if she had been very holy. But she would willingly, notwithstanding that, have committed uncleanness with him. Some cry out against sin, even as the mother cries out against her child in her lap, when she calleth it slut and naughty girl, and then falls to hugging and kissing it. Talkative. You lie at the catch, I perceive. Faithful. No, not I. I am only for setting things right. But what is the second thing whereby you would prove a discovery of a work of grace in the heart? Talkative. Great knowledge of gospel mysteries. Faithful. This sign should have been first, but first or last it is also false, for knowledge, great knowledge, may be obtained in the mysteries of the gospel, and yet no work of grace in the soul. Yea, if a man have all knowledge, he may yet be nothing, and so, consequently, be no child of God. 1 Corinthians 13:2. When Christ said, Do you know all these things? And the disciples answered, Yes. He added, Blessed are ye if ye do them. He doth not lay the blessing in the knowing of them, but in the doing of them. For there is a knowledge that is not attended with doing. He that knoweth his master's will and doeth it not. A man may know like an angel and yet be no Christian. Therefore your sign of it is not true. Indeed, to know is a thing that pleaseth talkers and boasters, but to do is that which pleaseth God. Not that the heart can be good without knowledge, for without that the heart is naught. There are therefore two sorts of knowledge, knowledge that resteth in the bare speculation of things, and knowledge that is accompanied with the grace of faith and love, which puts a man upon doing even the will of God from the heart. The first of these will serve the talker, but without the other the true Christian is not content. Give me understanding, and I shall keep thy law. Yea, I shall observe it with my whole heart. Psalms 119:34. Talkative. You lie at the catch again. This is not for edification. Faithful. Well, if you please, propound another sign how this work of grace discovereth itself where it is. Talkative. Not I, for I see we shall not agree. Faithful. Well, if you will not, will you give me leave to do it? Talkative. You may use your liberty. Faithful. A work of grace in the soul discovereth itself either to him that hath it, or to standers by. To him that hath it thus, it gives him conviction of sin, especially the defilement of his nature, and the sin of unbelief, for the sake of which he is sure to demand, if he findeth not mercy at God's hand, by faith in Jesus Christ. This sight and sense of things worketh in him sorrow and shame for sin. Psalm 38:18, Jeremiah 31:19, John 16:8, Romans 7:24, Mark 16:16, Galatians 2:16, Revelations 1:6. He findeth, moreover, revealed in him the Saviour of the world, and the absolute necessity of closing with him for life, at the which he findeth hungerings and thirstings after him, to which hungerings, etc., the promise is made. Now, according to the strength or weakness of his faith in his Saviour, so is his joy and peace, so is his love to holiness, so are his desires to know him more, and also to serve him in this world. But though, I say, it discovereth itself thus unto him, yet it is but seldom that he is able to conclude that this is a work of grace, because his corruptions now, and his abused reason, make his mind to misjudge in this matter. Therefore in him that hath this work there is required a very sound judgment, before he can with steadiness conclude that this is a work of grace. John 16:9, Galatians 2:15 and 16, Acts 4:12, Matthew 5:6, Revelations 21:6. To others it is thus discovered: 1. By an experimental confession of his faith in Christ. 2. By a life answerable to that confession, to wit, a life of holiness, heart holiness, family holiness, if he hath a family, and by conversation holiness in the world, which in the general teacheth him inwardly to abhor his sin, and himself for that in secret, to suppress it in his family, and to promote holiness in the world, not by talk only, as a hypocrite or talkative person may do, but by practical subjection in faith and love to the power of the word. Job 42:5 and 6, Psalm 50:23, Ezekiel 20:43, Matthew 5:8, John 14:15, Romans 10:10, Ezekiel 36:25, Philippians 1:27, and 3:17-20. And now, sir, as to this brief description of the work of grace, and also the discovery of it, if you have aught to object, object. If not, then give me leave to propound to you a second question. Talkative. Nay, my part is not now to object, but to hear. Let me therefore have your second question. Faithful. It is this: do you experience this first part of the description of it, and doth your life and conversation testify the same? Or standeth your religion in word or tongue, and not in deed and truth? Pray, if you incline to answer me in this, say no more than you know the God above will say amen to, and also nothing but what your conscience can justify you in. For not he that commendeth himself is approved, but whom the Lord commendeth. Besides, to say I am thus and thus when my conversation and all my neighbours tell me I lie, is great wickedness. Then Talkative at first began to blush, but, recovering himself, thus he replied: You come now to experience, to conscience, and to God, and to appeal to him for justification of what is spoken. This kind of discourse I did not expect, nor am I disposed to give an answer to such questions, because I count not myself bound thereto, unless you take upon you to be a catechizer, and though you should so do, yet I may refuse to make you my judge. But I pray, will you tell me why you ask me such questions? Faithful. Because I saw you forward to talk, and because I knew not that you had aught else but notion. Besides, to tell you all the truth, I have heard of you that you are a man whose religion lies in talk, and that your conversation gives this your mouth profession the lie. They say you are a spot among Christians, and that religion fareth the worse for your ungodly conversation, that some have already stumbled at your wicked ways, and that more are in danger of being destroyed thereby. Your religion, and an alehouse, and covetousness, and uncleanness, and swearing, and lying, and vain company keeping, etc., will stand together. The proverb is true of you which is said of a harlot, to wit, that she is a shame to all women. So are you a shame to all professors. Talkative. Since you are so ready to take up reports, and to judge so rashly as you do, I cannot but conclude you are some peevish or melancholy man, not fit to be discoursed with, and so adieu. Then up came Christian and said to his brother, I told you how it would happen. Your words and his lusts could not agree. He had rather leave your company than reform his life. But he is gone, as I said. Let him go. The loss is no man's but his own. He has saved us the trouble of going from him, for he continuing, as I suppose he will do, as he is, would have been but a blot in our company. Besides, the apostle says, from such withdraw thyself. Faithful. But I am glad we had this little discourse with him. It may have happened that he will think of it again. I have dealt plainly with him, and so am clear of his blood if he perisheth. Christian. You did well to talk so plainly to him as you did. There is but little of this faithful dealing with men nowadays, and that makes religion to stink so in the nostrils of many as it doth. For they are these talkative fools, whose religion is only in word, and who are debauched and vain in their conversation, that, being so much admitted into the fellowship of the godly, do puzzle the world, blemish Christianity, and grieve the sincere. I wish that all men would deal with such as you have done. Then should they either be made more comfortable to religion, or the company of saints would be too hot for them. Then did Faithful say, How talkative at first lifts up his plumes, how bravely doth he speak, how he presumes to drive down all before him. But so soon as Faithful talks of heart work, like the moon that's past the full, into the wane he goes, and so will all but he that heart work know. Thus they went on, talking of what they had seen by the way, and so made that way easy, which would otherwise no doubt have been tedious for them. For now they went through a wilderness. End Part 1, the 5th stage. Part 1, the 6th stage. Now when they were got almost quite out of this wilderness, Faithful chanced to cast his eye back, and espied one coming after them, and he knew him. "Oh," said Faithful to his brother, "who comes yonder?" Then Christian looked and said, "It is my good friend Evangelist." "Ay, and my good friend too," said Faithful, "for 'twas he that set me on the way to the gate." Now was Evangelist come up unto them, and thus saluted them. Evangelist. Peace be with you, dearly beloved, and peace be to your helpers. Christian. Welcome, welcome, my good Evangelist. The sight of thy countenance brings to my remembrance thy ancient kindness and unwearied labours for my eternal good. Faithful. And 1,000 times welcome, said good Faithful, thy company, O sweet Evangelist. How desirable is it to us poor pilgrims. Evangelist. Then said Evangelist, How hath it fared with you, my friends, since the time of our last parting? What have you met with, and how have you behaved yourselves? Then Christian and Faithful told him of all things that had happened to them in the way, and how, and with what difficulty, they had arrived to that place. Right glad am I, said Evangelist, not that you have met with trials, but that you have been victors, and for that you have, notwithstanding many weaknesses, continued in the way to this very day. I say, right glad am I of this thing, and that for mine own sake and yours. I have sowed, and you have reaped, and the day is coming when both he that soweth and they that reap shall rejoice together. John 4:36. That is, if you hold out, for in due season ye shall reap, if ye faint not. Galatians 6:9. The crown is before you, and it is an incorruptible one, so run that ye may obtain it. 1 Corinthians 9:24-27. Some there be that set out for this crown, and after they have gone far for it, another comes in and takes it from them. Hold fast therefore that you have. Let no man take your crown. Revelations 3:11. You are not yet out of the gunshot of the devil. You have not resisted unto blood, striving against sin. Let the kingdom be always before you, and believe steadfastly concerning the things that are invisible. Let nothing that is on this side the other world get within you. And above all, look well to your own hearts and to the lusts thereof, for they are deceitful above all things, and desperately wicked. Set your faces like a flint. You have all power in heaven and earth on your side. Christian. Then Christian thanked him for his exhortations, but told him withal that they would have him speak farther to them for their help the rest of the way, and the rather for that they well knew that he was a prophet, and could tell them of things that might happen unto them, and also how they might resist and overcome them, to which request Faithful also consented. So Evangelist began as followeth. Evangelist. My sons, you have heard in the word of the truth of the gospel, that you must through many tribulations enter into the kingdom of heaven, and again, that in every city bonds and afflictions abide you, and therefore you cannot expect that you should go long on your pilgrimage without them in some sort or other. You have found something of the truth of these testimonies upon you already, and more will immediately follow. For now, as you see, you are almost out of this wilderness, and therefore you will soon come into a town that you will by and by see before you. And in that town you will be hardly beset with enemies, who will strain hard, but they will kill you. And be sure that one or both of you must seal the testimony which you hold with blood. But be you faithful unto death, and the King will give you a crown of life. He that shall die there, although his death will be unnatural, and his pain perhaps great, he will yet have the better of his fellow, not only because he will be arrived at the celestial city soonest, but because he will escape many miseries that the other will meet with in the rest of his journey. But when you are come to the town, and shall find fulfilled what I have here related, then remember your friend, and quit yourselves like men, and commit the keeping of your souls to God in well-doing, as unto a faithful Creator. Then I saw in my dream that when they were got out of the wilderness, they presently saw a town before them, and the name of that town is Vanity, and at the town there is a fair kept, called Vanity Fair. It is kept all the year long. It beareth the name of Vanity Fair, because the town where it is kept is lighter than vanity. Psalm 62:9. And also because all that is there sold, or that cometh thither, is vanity, as is the saying of the wise, all that cometh is vanity. Ecclesiastes 11:8. See also 1:2-14, 2:11-17, Isaiah 40:17. This fair is no new erected business, but a thing of ancient standing. I will show you the original of it. Almost 5,000 years ago there were pilgrims walking to the celestial city, as these two honest persons are. And Beelzebub, Apollyon, and Legion, with their companions, perceiving by the path that the pilgrims made that their way to the city lay through this town of vanity, they contrived here to set up a fair wherein should be sold all sorts of vanity, and that it should last all the year long. Therefore at this fair are all such merchandise sold as houses, lands, trades, places, honours, preferments, titles, countries, kingdoms, lusts, pleasures, and delights of all sorts, as harlots, wives, husbands, children, masters, servants, lives, blood, bodies, souls, silver, gold, pearls, precious stones, and what not. Moreover, at this fair there is at all times to be seen jugglings, cheats, games, plays, fools, apes, knaves, rogues, and that of every kind. Here are to be seen too, and that for nothing, thefts, murders, adulteries, false swearers, and that of a blood-red colour. And as in other fairs of less moment, there are the several rows and streets under their proper names, where such and such wares are vended. So here likewise you have the proper places, rows, streets, namely, countries and kingdoms, where the wares of this fair are soonest to be found. Here is the Briton row, the French row, the Italian row, the Spanish row, the German row, where several sorts of vanities are to be sold. But, as in other fairs, one commodity is as the chief of all the fair, so the ware of Rome and her merchandise is greatly promoted in this fair. Only our English nation, with some others, have taken a dislike thereat. Now, as I said, the way to the celestial city lies just through this town, where this lusty fair is kept. And he that will go to the city, and yet not go through this town, must needs go out of the world. 1 Corinthians 4:10. The Prince of Princes himself, when here, went through this town to his own country, and that upon a fair day too. Yea, and, as I think, it was Beelzebub, the chief lord of this fair, that invited him to buy of his vanities. yea, would have made him lord of the fair, would he but have done him reverence as he went through the town. Yea, because he was such a person of honour, Beelzebub had him from street to street, and showed him all the kingdoms of the world in a little time, that he might, if possible, allure that blessed one to cheapen and buy some of his vanities. But he had no mind to the merchandise. Matthew 4, 8 and 9, Luke 4, 5 to 7. This fair, therefore, is an ancient thing of long standing, and a very great fair. Now these pilgrims, as I said, must needs go through this fair. Well, so they did. But behold, even as they entered into the fair, all the people in the fair were moved, and the town itself, as it were, in a hubbub about them, and that for several reasons. First, the pilgrims were clothed with such kind of raiment as was diverse from the raiment of any that traded in that fair. The people therefore of the fair made a great gazing upon them. Some said they were fools, 1 Corinthians 4, 9 and 10. Some they were bedlams, and some they were outlandish men. Secondly, and as they wondered at their apparel, so they did likewise at their speech, for few could understand what they said. They naturally spoke the language of Canaan, but they that kept the fair were the men of this world, so that from one end of the fair to the other they seemed barbarians, each to the other. 1 Corinthians 2, 7 and 8. Thirdly, but that which did not a little amuse the merchandisers was, that these pilgrims set very light by all their wares. They cared not so much as to look upon them, and if they called upon them to buy, they would put their fingers in their ears and cry, "Turn away mine eyes from beholding vanity," Psalm 119:37, and look upward, signifying that their trade and traffic was in heaven. Philippians 3:20 and 21. One chanced mockingly, beholding the carriage of the men, to say unto them, What will ye buy? But they, looking gravely upon him, said, We buy the truth. Proverbs 23:23. At that there was an occasion taken to despise the men the more, some mocking, some taunting, some speaking reproachfully, and some calling upon others to smite them. At last things came to an hubbub and great stir in the fair, insomuch that all order was confounded. Now was word presently brought to the great one of the fair, who quickly came down, and deputed some of his most trusty friends to take those men into examination, about whom the fair was almost overturned. So the men were brought to examination, and they that sat upon them asked them whence they came, whither they went, and what they did there in such an unusual garb. The men told them they were pilgrims and strangers in the world, and that they were going to their own country, which was the heavenly Jerusalem. Hebrews 11:13-16. And that they had given no occasion to the men of the town, nor yet to the merchandisers thus to abuse them, and to let them in their journey, except it was for that, when one asked them what they would buy, they said they would buy the truth. But they that were appointed to examine them did not believe them to be any other than bedlams and mad, or else such as came to put all things into a confusion in the fair. Therefore they took them and beat them, and besmeared them with dirt, and then put them into the cage, that they might be made a spectacle to all the men of the fair. There therefore they lay for some time, and were made the objects of any man's sport, or malice, or revenge, the great one of the fair laughing still at all that befell them. But the men being patient, and not rendering railing for railing, but contrariwise blessing, and giving good words for bad, and kindness for injuries done, some men in the fair, that were more observing and less prejudiced than the rest, began to check and blame the baser sort for the continual abuses done by them to the men. They therefore in an angry manner let fly at them again, counting them as bad as the men in the cage, and telling them that they seemed confederates, and should be made partakers of their misfortunes. The others replied that, for aught they could see, the men were quiet and sober, and intended nobody any harm, and that there were many that traded in their fare that were more worthy to be put into the cage, yea, and pillory too, than were the men that they had abused. Thus, after divers words had passed on both sides, the men behaving themselves all the while very wisely and soberly before them, they fell to some blows among themselves, and did harm one to another. Then were these two poor men brought before the examiners again, and were charged as being guilty of the late hubbub that had been in the fair. So they beat them pitifully, and hanged irons upon them, and led them in chains up and down the fair, for an example and terror to others, lest any should speak in their behalf, or join themselves unto them. But Christian and Faithful behaved themselves yet more wisely, and received the ignominy and shame that was cast upon them with so much meekness and patience, that it won to their side, though but few in comparison of the rest, several of the men in the fair. This put the other party yet into a greater rage, insomuch that they concluded the death of these two men. Wherefore they threatened that neither cage nor irons should serve their turn, but that they should die for the abuse they had done, and for deluding the men of the fair. Then were they remanded to the cage again, until further order should be taken with them. So they put them in, and made their feet fast in the stocks. Here also they called again to mind what they had heard from their faithful friend Evangelist, and were the more confirmed in their way and sufferings by what he told them would happen to them. They also now comforted each other, that whose lot it was to suffer, even he should have the best of it. Therefore each man secretly wished that he might have that preferment. But committing themselves to the all-wise disposal of him that ruleth all things, with much content they abode in the condition in which they were, until they should be otherwise disposed of. Then a convenient time being appointed, they brought them forth to their trial, in order to their condemnation. When the time was come, they were brought before their enemies and arraigned. The judge's name was Lord Hategood. The indictment was one and the same in substance, though somewhat varying in form. The contents whereof was this, that they were enemies to, and disturbers of, the trade, that they had made commotions and divisions in the town, and had won a party to their own most dangerous opinions, in contempt of the law of their prince. Then Faithful began to answer, that he had only set himself against that which had set itself against him that is higher than the highest. And, said he, as for disturbance, I make none, being myself a man of peace. The parties that were won to us were won by beholding our truth and innocence, and they are only turned from the worse to the better. And as to the king you talk of, since he is Beelzebub, the enemy of our Lord, I defy him and all his angels. Then proclamation was made, that they that had aught to say for their lord the king against the prisoner at the bar should forthwith appear and give in their evidence. So they came in 3 witnesses, to wit, Envy, Superstition, and Pickthank. They were then asked if they knew the prisoner at the bar, and what they had to say for their lord the king against him. Then stood forth Envy, and said to this effect, My lord, I have known this man a long time, and will attest upon my oath before this honourable bench that he is... Judge. Hold, give him his oath. So they swear him. Then he said, My lord, this man, notwithstanding his plausible name, is one of the vilest men in our country. He neither regardeth prince nor people, law nor custom, but doeth all that he can to possess all men with certain of his disloyal notions, which he in the general calls principles of faith and holiness. And in particular I heard him once myself affirm that Christianity and the customs of our town of Vanity were diametrically opposite, and could not be reconciled. By which saying, my lord, he doth at once not only condemn all our laudable doings, but us in the doing of them. Then did the judge say to him, Hast thou any more to say? Envy. My lord, I could say much more, only I would not be tedious to the court. Yet if need be, when the other gentlemen have given in their evidence, rather than anything shall be wanting that will dispatch him, I will enlarge my testimony against him. So he was bid to stand by. Then they called Superstition and bid him look upon the prisoner. They also asked what he could say for their lord the king against him. Then they sware him. So he began. Superstition. My lord, I have no great acquaintance with this man, nor do I desire to have further knowledge of him. However, this I know, that he is a very pestilent fellow, from some discourse that I had with him the other day in this town. For there, in talking with him, I heard him say that our religion was naught, and such by which a man could by no means please God. Which saying of his, my lord, your lordship very well knows what necessarily thence will follow, to wit, that we still do worship in vain, are yet in our sins, and finally shall be damned. And this is that which I have to say. Then was Pickthank sworn, and bid say what he knew in the behalf of their lord the king against the prisoner at the bar. Pickthank. My lord, and you gentlemen all, this fellow I have known of a long time, and have heard him speak things that ought not to be spoken. For he hath railed on our noble prince Beelzebub, and hath spoken contemptibly of his honourable friends, whose names are the Lord Old Man, the Lord Carnal Delight, the Lord Luxurious, the Lord Desire of Vainglory, my old Lord Lechery, Sir Having Greedy, with all the rest of our nobility. And he hath said moreover that if all men were of his mind, if possible, there is not one of these noblemen should have any longer a being in this town. Besides, he hath not been afraid to rail on you, my lord, who are now appointed to be his judge, calling you an ungodly villain, with many other such like vilifying terms, with which he hath bespattered most of the gentry of our town. When this Pickthank had told his tale, the judge directed his speech to the prisoner at the bar, saying, Thou runagate, heretic, and traitor, hast thou heard what these honest gentlemen have witnessed against thee? Faithful. May I speak a few words in my own defence? Judge. Sirrah, sirrah, thou deservest to live no longer, but to be slain immediately upon the place. Yet, that all men may see our gentleness towards thee, let us hear what thou, vile runagate, hast to say. Faithful. 1. I say then, in answer to what Mr. Envy hath spoken, I never said aught but this, that what rule or laws or custom or people were flat against the word of God are diametrically opposite to Christianity. If I have said amiss in this, convince me of my error, and I am ready here before you to make my recantation. 2. As to the second, to wit, Mr. Superstition and his charge against me, I said only this, that in the worship of God there is required a divine faith, but there can be no divine faith without a divine revelation of the will of God. Therefore whatever is thrust into the worship of God that is not agreeable to divine revelation cannot be done but by a human faith, which faith will not be profitable to eternal life. 3. As to what Mr. Pickthank hath said, I say, avoiding terms as that I am said to rail and the like, that the prince of this town, with all the rabblement his attendants, by this gentleman named, are more fit for a being in hell than in this town and country. And so the Lord have mercy upon me. Then the judge called to the jury, who all this while stood by to hear and observe. Gentlemen of the jury, you see this man about whom so great an uproar hath been made in this town. You have also heard what these worthy gentlemen have witnessed against him. Also you have heard his reply and confession. It lieth now in your breast to hang him, or save his life. But yet I think meet to instruct you in our law. There was an act made in the days of Pharaoh the Great, servant to our prince, that lest those of a contrary religion should multiply and grow too strong for him, their males should be thrown into the river. Exodus 1:22. There was also an act made in the days of Nebuchadnezzar the Great, another of his servants, that whoever would not fall down and worship his golden image should be thrown into a fiery furnace. Daniel 3:6. There was also an act made in the days of Darius, that whoso for some time called upon any god but him should be cast into the lion's den. Daniel 6:7. Now the substance of these laws this rebel has broken, not only in thought, which is not to be borne, but also in word and deed, which must therefore needs be intolerable. For that of Pharaoh, his law was made upon a supposition to prevent mischief, no crime being yet apparent. But here is a crime apparent. For the second and third, you see he disputeth against our religion, and for the treason that he hath already confessed, he deserveth to die the death. Then went the jury out, whose names were Mr. Blind Man, Mr. No Good, Mr. Malice, Mr. Lovelust, Mr. Live Loose, Mr. Heady, Mr. High Mind, Mr. Enmity, Mr. Liar, Mr. Cruelty, Mr. Hatelight, and Mr. Implacable, who every one gave in his private verdict against him among themselves, and afterwards unanimously concluded to bring him in guilty before the judge. And first among themselves Mr. Blindman, the foreman, said, I see clearly that this man is a heretic. Then said Mr. No Good, Away with such a fellow from the earth. Ay, said Mr. Malice, for I hate the very looks of him. Then said Mr. Lovelust, I could never endure him. Nor I, said Mr. Liveloose, for he would always be condemning my way. Hang him, said Mr. Heady. A sorry scrub, said Mr. High Mind. My heart riseth against him, said Mr. Enmity. He is a rogue, said Mr. Liar. Hanging is too good for him, said Mr. Cruelty. Let us dispatch him out of the way, said Mr. Hatelight. Then said Mr. Implacable, Might I have all the world given me, I could not be reconciled to him. Therefore let us forthwith bring him in guilty of death. And so they did. Therefore he was presently condemned to be had from the place where he was, to the place from whence he came, and there to be put to the most cruel death that could be invented. They therefore brought him out, to do with him according to their law, and first they scourged him, then they buffeted him, then they lanced his flesh with knives. After that they stoned him with stones, then pricked him with their swords, and last of all they burnt him to ashes at the stake. Thus came Faithful to his end. Now I saw that there stood behind the multitude a chariot and a couple of horses waiting for Faithful, who, so soon as his adversaries had dispatched him, was taken up into it, and straightway was carried up through the clouds with sound of trumpet, the nearest way to the celestial gate. But as for Christian, he had some respite, and was remanded back to prison. So he there remained for a space. But he who overrules all things, having the power of their rage in his own hand, so wrought it about that Christian for that time escaped them, and went his way. And as he went he sang, saying, Well, Faithful, thou hast faithfully professed unto thy Lord, with whom thou shalt be blessed, when faithless ones, with all their vain delights, are crying out under their hellish plights. Sing, Faithful, sing, and let thy name survive, for though they killed thee, thou art yet alive. End Part 1, the 6th stage. Part 1, the 7th stage. Now I saw in my dream that Christian went not forth alone, for there was one whose name was Hopeful, being so made by the beholding of Christian and Faithful in their words and behaviour, in their sufferings at the fair, who joined himself unto him, and entering into a brotherly covenant, told him that he would be his companion. Thus one died to bear testimony to the truth, and another rises out of his ashes to be a companion with Christian in his pilgrimage. This Hopeful also told Christian that there were many more of the men in the fair that would take their time and follow after. So I saw that quickly after they were got out of the fair, they overtook one that was going before them, whose name was By-ends. So they said to him, What countryman, sir? And how far go you this way? He told them that he came from the town of Fair Speech, and he was going to the celestial city, but told them not his name. From Fair Speech, said Christian, is there any good that lives there? Proverbs 26:25. Bayans. Yes, said Bayans, I hope so. Christian. Pray, sir, what may I call you? Said Christian. Bayans. I am a stranger to you, and you to me. If you be going this way, I shall be glad of your company. If not, I must be content. Christian. This town of Fair Speech, said Christian, I have heard of, and, as I remember, they say it's a wealthy place. Bayans. Yes, I will assure you that it is, and I have many rich kindred there. Christian. Pray, who are your kindred there, if a man may be so bold? Bayans. Almost the whole town, and in particular my Lord Turnabout, my Lord Time-server, my Lord Fair-speech, from whose ancestors that town first took its name. Also Mr. Smoothman, Mr. Facing Both Ways, Mr. Anything, and the parson of our parish, Mr. Two-Tongues, who was my mother's own brother by father's side. And, to tell you the truth, I am become a gentleman of good quality. Yet my great-grandfather was but a waterman, looking one way and rowing another, and I got most of my estate by the same occupation. Christian. Are you a married man? Bayans. Yes, and my wife is a very virtuous woman, the daughter of a virtuous woman. She was my Lord Faning's daughter. Therefore she came of a very honourable family, and is arrived to such a pitch of breeding that she knows how to carry it to all, even to prince and peasant. 'Tis true we somewhat differ in religion from those of the stricter sort, yet but in two small points. First, we never strive against wind and tide. Secondly, we are always most zealous when religion goes in his silver slippers. We love much to walk with him in the street, if the sun shines and the people applaud him. Then Christian stepped a little aside to his fellow hopeful, saying, It runs in my mind that this is one Bayans of Fair Speech, and if it be he, we have as very a knave in our company as dwelleth in all these parts. Then said Hopeful, Ask him. Methinks he should not be ashamed of his name. So Christian came up with him again and said, Sir, you talk as if you knew something more than all the world doth, and if I take not my mark amiss, I deem I have half a guess of you. Is not your name Mr. Bayans of Fair Speech? Bayans. This is not my name, but indeed it is a nickname that is given me by some that cannot abide me, and I must be content to bear it as a reproach, as other good men have borne theirs before me. Christian. But did you never give an occasion to men to call you by this name? Bayans. Never, never. The worst that ever I did to give them occasion to give me this name was, that I had always the luck to jump in my judgment with the present way of the times, whatever it was, and my chance was to get thereby. But if things are thus cast upon me, let me count them a blessing, but let not the malicious load me therefore with reproach. Christian. I thought indeed that you were the man that I heard of, and to tell you what I think, I fear this name belongs to you more properly than you are willing we should think it doth. Bayans. Well, if you will thus imagine, I cannot help it. You shall find me a fair company keeper, if you will still admit me your associate. Christian. If you will go with us, you must go against wind and tide, the which I perceive against your opinion. You must also own religion in his rags as well as when in his silver slippers, and stand by him too when bound in irons, as well as when he walketh the streets with applause. Bayans. You must not impose, nor lord it over my faith. Leave me to my liberty, and let me go with you. Christian. Not a step farther unless you will do in what I propound, as we. Then said Bayans, I shall never desert my old principles, since they are harmless and profitable. If I may not go with you, I must do as I did before you overtook me, even go by myself until some overtake me that will be glad of my company. Now I saw in my dream that Christian and Hopeful forsook him, and kept their distance before him. But one of them looking back saw 3 men following Mr. Byans, and behold, as they came up with him, he made them a very low congee, and they also gave him a compliment. The men's names were Mr. Hold the World, Mr. Moneylove, and Mr. Save All, men that Mr. Byans had formerly been acquainted with, for in their minority they were schoolfellows, and taught by one Mr. Gripman, a schoolmaster in Loughgane, which is a market town in the county of Coverting, in the north. The schoolmaster taught them the art of getting, either by violence, cozenage, flattering, lying, or by putting on a guise of religion. And these 4 gentlemen had attained much of the art of their master, so that they could each of them have kept such a school themselves. Well, when they had, as I said, thus saluted each other, Mr. Moneylove said to Mr. Byans, "Who are they upon the road before us?" For Christian and Hopeful were yet within view. Byans, "They are a couple of far countrymen, that after their mode are going on pilgrimage." Mr. Moneylove, "Alas, why did they not stay, that we might have had their good company? For they and we, and you, sir, I hope, are all going on pilgrimage." Byans, "We are so indeed, but the men before us are so rigid, and love so much their own notions, and do also so lightly esteem the opinions of others, that let a man be ever so godly, yet if he jumps not with them in all things, they thrust him quite out of their company." Mr. Save-all, "That is bad, but we read of some that are righteous overmuch, and such men's rigidness prevails with them to judge and condemn all but themselves. But I pray, what and how many were the things wherein you differed?" Byans, "Why, they, after their headstrong manner, conclude that it is their duty to rush on their journey all weathers, and I am for waiting for wind and tide. They are for hazarding all for God at a clap, and I am for taking all advantages to secure my life and estate. They are for holding their notions, though all other men be against them. But I am for religion and what, and so far as the times and my safety will bear it. They are for religion when in rags and contempt, but I am for him when he walks in his silver slippers, in the sunshine, and with applause. Mr. Hold the World, "Ay, and hold you there still, good Mr. Byans, for my part, I can count him but a fool, that having the liberty to keep what he has, shall be so unwise as to lose it. Let us be wise as serpents. It is best to make hay while the sun shines. You see how the bee lieth still in winter, and bestirs her only when she can have profit with pleasure. God sends sometimes rain, and sometimes sunshine. If they be such fools to go through the first, yet let us be content to take fair weather along with us. For my part, I like that religion best that will stand with the security of God's good blessings unto us. For who can imagine that is ruled by his reason, since God has bestowed upon us the good things of this life, but that he would have us keep them for his sake? Abraham and Solomon grew rich in religion, and Job says that a good man shall lay up gold as dust. But he must not be such as the men before us, if they be as you have described them." Mr. Save-all, "I think that we are all agreed in this matter, and therefore there needs no more words about it." Mr. Moneylove, "No, there needs no more words about this matter indeed, for he that believes neither scripture nor reason, and you see we have both on our side, neither knows his own liberty nor seeks his own safety." Byans, "My brethren, we are, as you see, going all on pilgrimage, and for our better diversion from things that are bad, give me leave to propound unto you this question. Suppose a man, a minister or a tradesman, etc., should have an advantage lie before him to get the good blessings of this life, yet so as that he can by no means come by them, except, in appearance at least, he becomes extraordinarily zealous in some points of religion that he meddled not with before. May he not use this means to attain his end, and yet be a right honest man?" Mr. Moneylove, "I see the bottom of your question, and with these gentlemen's good leave I will endeavour to shape you an answer. And first, to speak to your question as it concerneth a minister himself. Suppose a minister, a worthy man, possessed but of a very small benefice, and has in his eye a greater, more fat and plump by far. He has also now an opportunity of getting it, yet so as by being more studious, by preaching more frequently and zealously, and because the temper of the people requires it, by altering of some of his principles. For my part, I see no reason why a man may not do this, provided he has a call, ay, and more a great deal besides, and yet be an honest man. For why? 1. His desire of a greater benefice is lawful. This cannot be contradicted, since it is set before him by providence. So then he may get it if he can, making no question for conscience' sake. 2. Besides, his desire after that benefice makes him more studious, a more zealous preacher, etc., and so makes him a better man, yea, makes him better improve his parts, which is according to the mind of God. 3. Now, as for his complying with the temper of his people, by deserting to serve them some of his principles, this argueth, 1. That he is of a self-denying temper, 2. Of a sweet and winning deportment, and 3. So more fit for the ministerial function. 4. I conclude then that a minister that changes a small for a great should not for so doing be judged as covetous, but rather, since he is improved in his parts and industry thereby, be counted as one that pursues his call, and the opportunity put into his hand to do good. And now to the second part of the question, which concerns the tradesman you mentioned. Suppose such an one to have but a poor employ in the world, but by becoming religious he may mend his market, perhaps get a rich wife, or more and far better customers to his shop. For my part, I see no reason but this may be lawfully done. For why? 1. To become religious is a virtue, by what means soever a man becomes so. 2. Nor is it unlawful to get a rich wife or more custom to my shop. 3. Besides, the man that gets these by becoming religious gets that which is good of them that are good, by becoming good himself. So then here is a good wife, and good customers, and good gain, and all these by becoming religious, which is good. Therefore, to become religious to get all these is a good and profitable design. This answer, thus made by Mr. Moneylove to Mr. Bunyan's question, was highly applauded by them all, wherefore they concluded upon the whole that it was most wholesome and advantageous. And because, as they thought, no man was able to contradict it, and because Christian and Hopeful were yet within call, they jointly agreed to assault them with the question as soon as they overtook them, and the rather because they had opposed Mr. Bunyan's before. So they called after them, and they stopped and stood still till they came up to them. But they concluded as they went that not Mr. Bunyan's, but old Mr. Hold-the-World should propound the question to them, because, as they supposed, their answer to him would be without the remainder of that heat that was kindled betwixt Mr. Bunyan's and them at their parting a little before. So they came up to each other, and after a short salutation, Mr. Hold-the-World propounded the question to Christian and his fellow, and then bid them to answer if they could. Then said Christian, Even a babe in religion may answer 10,000 such questions. For if it be unlawful to follow Christ for loaves, as it is, John 6:26, how much more abominable is it to make of him and religion a stalking horse to get and enjoy the world? Nor do we find any other than heathens, hypocrites, devils, and wizards that are of this opinion. 1. Heathens. For when Hamor and Shechem had a mind to the daughter and cattle of Jacob, they saw that there was no way for them to come at them but by being circumcised. They said to their companions, If every male of us be circumcised as they are circumcised, shall not their cattle and their substance and every beast of theirs be ours? Their daughters and their cattle were that which they sought to obtain, and their religion the stalking horse they made use of to come at them. Read the whole story, Genesis 34:20-24. 2. The hypocritical Pharisees were also of this religion. Long prayers were their pretence, but to get widows' houses was their intent, and greater damnation was from God their judgment. Luke 20:46-47. 3. Judas the devil was also of this religion. He was religious for the bag, that he might be possessed of what was put therein. But he was lost, cast away, and the very son of perdition. 4. Simon the wizard was of this religion too, for he would have had the Holy Ghost, that he might have got money therewith, and his sentence from Peter's mouth was according. Acts 8:19-22. Neither will it go out of my mind that that man who takes up religion for the world will throw away religion for the world. For so surely as Judas designed the world in becoming religious, so surely did he also sell religion and his master for the same. To answer the question, therefore, affirmatively, as I perceive you have done, and to accept of as authentic such answer, is heathenish, hypocritical, and devilish, and your reward will be according to your works. Then they stood staring one upon another, but had not wherewith to answer Christian. Hopeful also approved of the soundness of Christian's answer, so there was a great silence among them. Mr. Byans and his company also staggered and kept behind, that Christian and Hopeful might outgo them. Then said Christian to his fellow, If these men cannot stand before the sentence of men, what will they do with the sentence of God? And if they are mute when dealt with by vessels of clay, what will they do when they shall be rebuked by the flames of a devouring fire? Then Christian and Hopeful outwent them again, and went till they came at a delicate plain called Ease, where they went with much content. But that plain was but narrow, so they were quickly got over it. Now at the farther side of that plain was a little hill called Lucca, and in that hill a silver mine, which some of them that had formerly gone that way, because of the rarity of it, had turned aside to see. But going too near the brim of the pit, the ground, being deceitful under them, broke, and they were slain. Some also had been maimed there, and could not to their dying day be their own men again. Then I saw in my dream that a little off the road, over against the silver mine, stood Demas, gentlemanlike, to call passengers to come and see, who said to Christian and his fellow, Ho, turn aside hither, and I will show you a thing. Christian, what thing so deserving as to turn us out of the way to see it? Demas, here is a silver mine, and some digging in it for treasure. If you'll come, with a little pains you may richly provide for yourselves. Hopeful. Then said Hopeful, Let us go see. Christian. Not I, said Christian. I have heard of this place before now, and how many there have been slain. And besides, that treasure is a snare to those that seek it, for it hindereth them in their pilgrimage. Then Christian called to Demas, saying, Is not the place dangerous? Hath it not hindered many in their pilgrimage? Hosea 9:6. Demas. Not very dangerous, except to those that are careless. But withal he blushed as he spake. Christian. Then said Christian to Hopeful, Let us not stir a step, but still keep on our way. Hopeful. I will warrant you, when Byans comes up, if he hath the same invitation as we, he will turn in thither to see. Christian. No doubt thereof, for his principles lead him that way, and 100 to 1 but he dies there. Demas. Then Demas called again, saying, But will you not come over and see? Christian. Then Christian roundly answered, saying, Demas, thou art an enemy to the right ways of the Lord of this way, and hast been already condemned for thine own turning aside by one of his Majesty's judges. 2 Timothy 4:10. And why seekest thou to bring us into the like condemnation? Besides, if we at all turn aside, our Lord the King will certainly hear thereof, and will there put us to shame, where we would stand with boldness before him. Demas cried again that he also was one of their fraternity, and that if they would tarry a little, he also himself would walk with them. Christian. Then said Christian, What is thy name? Is it not the same by which I have called thee? Demas. Yes, my name is Demas. I am the son of Abraham. Christian. I know you, Gehazi was your great-grandfather, and Judas your father, and you have trod in their steps. It is but a devilish prank that thou usest. Thy father was hanged for a traitor, and thou deservest no better reward. 2 Kings 5:20-27. Matthew 26:14 and 15. 27, 3-5. Assure thyself that when we come to the king, we will tell him of this thy behaviour. Thus they went their way. By this time By-ends and his companions were come again within sight, and they at the first beck went over to Demas. Now whether they fell into the pit by looking over the brink thereof, or whether they went down to dig, or whether they were smothered in the bottom by the damps that commonly arise, of these things I am not certain. But this I observed, that they were never seen again in the way. Then sang Christian. By-ends and Silver Demas both agree, one calls, the other runs, that he may be a sharer in his lucre. So these two take up in this world, and no farther go. Now I saw that just on the other side of this plain, the pilgrims came to a place where stood an old monument, hard by the highway side, at the sight of which they were both concerned, because of the strangeness of the form thereof, for it seemed to them as if it had been a woman transformed into the shape of a pillar. Here therefore they stood looking and looking upon it, but could not for a time tell what they should make thereof. At last Hopeful espied, written upon the head thereof, a writing in an unusual hand, but he being no scholar called to Christian, for he was learned, to see if he could pick out the meaning. So he came, and after a little laying of letters together, he found the same to be this: Remember Lot's wife. So he read it to his fellow, after which they both concluded that that was the pillar of salt into which Lot's wife was turned, for her looking back with a covetous heart when she was going from Sodom for safety. Genesis 19:26. Which sudden and amazing sight gave them occasion for this discourse. Christian. Ah, my brother, this is a seasonable sight. It came opportunely to us after the invitation which Demas gave us to come over to view the hill Lucre. And had we gone over as he desired us, and as thou wast inclined to do, my brother, we had, for aught I know, been made like this woman, a spectacle for those that shall come after to behold. Hopeful. I am sorry that I was so foolish, and am made to wonder that I am not now as Lot's wife, for wherein was the difference betwixt her sin and mine? She only looked back, and I had a desire to go see. Let grace be adored, and let me be ashamed that ever such a thing should be in mine heart. Christian. Let us take notice of what we see here, for our help from time to come. This woman escaped one judgment, for she fell not by the destruction of Sodom. Yet she was destroyed by another, as we see. She is turned into a pillar of salt. Hopeful. True, and she may be to us both caution and example. Caution that we should shun her sin, or a sign of what judgment will overtake, such as shall not be prevented by this caution. So Korah, Dathan, and Abiram, with the 250 men that perished in their sin, did also become a sign or example to others to beware. Numbers 16:31 and 32. 26:9 and 10. But above all I muse at one thing, to wit, how Demas and his fellows can stand so confidently yonder to look for that treasure, which this woman but for looking behind her after. For we read not that she stepped 1 foot out of the way, was turned into a pillar of salt, especially since the judgment which overtook her did make her an example within sight of where they are. For they cannot choose but see her, did they but lift up their eyes. Christian. It is a thing to be wondered at, and it argueth that their hearts are grown desperate in the case, and I cannot tell who to compare them to so fitly, as to them that pick pockets in the presence of the judge, or that will cut purses under the gallows. It is said of the men of Sodom that they were sinners exceedingly, because they were sinners before the Lord, that is in his eyesight, and notwithstanding the kindnesses that he had shown them. For the land of Sodom was now like the Garden of Eden as heretofore. Genesis 13:10-13. This therefore provoked him the more to jealousy, and made their plague as hot as the fire of the Lord out of heaven could make it. And it is most rationally to be concluded that such, even such as these are, that shall sin in the sight, yea, and that too in despite of such examples that are set continually before them, to caution them to the contrary, must be partakers of severest judgments. Hopeful. Doubtless thou hast said the truth, but what a mercy is it that neither thou, but especially I, am not made myself this example. This ministereth occasion to us to thank God, to fear before him, and always to remember Lot's wife. I saw then that they went on their way to a pleasant river, which David the king called the river of God, but John the river of the water of life. Psalm 65:9, Revelations 22:1, Ezekiel 47:1-9. Now their way lay just upon the bank of this river. Here therefore Christian and his companion walked with great delight. They drank also of the water of the river, which was pleasant and enlivening to their weary spirits. Besides, on the banks of this river, on either side, were green trees with all manner of fruit, and the leaves they ate to prevent surfeits, and other diseases that are incident to those that heat their blood by travel. On either side of the river was also a meadow, curiously beautified with lilies, and it was green all the year long. In this meadow they lay down and slept, for here they might lie down safely. Psalm 23:2, Isaiah 14:30. When they awoke, they gathered again of the fruit of the trees, and drank again of the water of the river, and then lay down again to sleep. Thus they did several days and nights. Then they sang, Behold ye, how these crystal streams do glide, to comfort pilgrims by the highway's side. The meadows green, besides their fragrant smell, yield dainties for them, and he that can tell what pleasant fruit, yea, leaves these trees do yield, will soon sell all, that he may buy this field. So when they were disposed to go on, for they were not as yet at their journey's end, they ate and drank and departed. Now I beheld in my dream that they had not journeyed far, but the river and the way for a time parted, at which they were not a little sorry. Yet they durst not go out of the way. Now the way from the river was rough, and their feet tender by reason of their travels. So the souls of the pilgrim were much discouraged because of the way. Numbers 21:4. Wherefore still as they went on, they wished for a better way. Now a little before them there was on the left hand of the road a meadow, and a stile to go over into it, and that meadow is called Bypath Meadow. Then said Christian to his fellow, If this meadow lieth along by our wayside, let's go over into it. Then he went to the stile to see, and behold, a path lay along by the way on the other side of the fence. It is according to my wish, said Christian. Here is the easiest going. Come, good Hopeful, and let us go over. Hopeful. But how if this path should lead us out of the way? Christian. That is not likely, said the other. Look, doth it not go along by the wayside? So Hopeful, being persuaded by his fellow, went after him over the stile. When they were gone over and were got into the path, they found it very easy for their feet, and withal they, looking before them, espied a man walking as they did, and his name was Vain Confidence. So they called after him, and asked him whither that way led. He said, To the Celestial Gate. Look, said Christian, did not I tell you so? By this you may see we are right. So they followed, and he went before them. But behold, the night came on, and it grew very dark, so that they that went behind lost the sight of him that went before. He therefore that went before, Vain Confidence by name, not seeing the way before him, fell into a deep pit, which was on purpose there made, by the prince of those grounds, to catch vainglorious fools withal, and was dashed in pieces with his fall. Isaiah 9:16. Now Christian and his fellow heard him fall, so they called to know the matter, but there was no answer, only they heard a groaning. Then said Hopeful, Where are we now? Then was his fellow silent, as mistrusting that he had led him out of the way. And now it began to rain and thunder, and lighten in a most dreadful manner, and the water rose amain. Then Hopeful groaned in himself, saying, Oh, that I had kept on my way. Christian, who could have thought that this path should have led us out of the way? Hopeful, I was afraid on't at the very first, and therefore gave you that gentle caution. I would have spoke plainer, but that you are older than I. Christian, good brother, be not offended. I am sorry I have brought thee out of the way, and that I have put thee into such imminent danger. Pray, my brother, forgive me. I did not do it of an evil intent. Hopeful, be comforted, my brother, for I forgive thee, and believe too that this shall be for our good. Christian, I am glad I have with me a merciful brother, but we must not stand here. Let us try to go back again. Hopeful, but, good brother, let me go before. Christian, no, if you please, let me go first, that if there be any danger, I may be first therein, because by my means we are both gone out of the way. Hopeful, no, said Hopeful, you shall not go first, for your mind, being troubled, may lead you out of the way again. Then for their encouragement they heard the voice of one saying, Let thine heart be toward the highway, even the way that thou wentest, turn again. Jeremiah 31:21. But by this time the waters were greatly risen, by reason of the which the way of going back was very dangerous. Then I thought that it is easier going out of the way when we are in, than going in when we are out. Yet they adventured to go back, but it was so dark and the flood was so high, that in their going back they had like to have been drowned 9 or 10 times. Neither could they, with all the skill they had, get again to the stile that night. Wherefore at last, lighting under a little shelter, they sat down there till the daybreak, but being weary they fell asleep. Now there was, not far from the place where they lay, a castle called Doubting Castle, the owner whereof was Giant Despair, and it was in his grounds they now were sleeping. Wherefore he, getting up in the morning early, and walking up and down in his fields, called Christian, and Hopeful asleep in his grounds. Then with a grim and surly voice he bid them awake, and asked them whence they were, and what they did in his grounds. They told him they were pilgrims, and that they had lost their way. Then said the giant, You have this night trespassed on me by trampling in, and lying on my grounds, and therefore you must go along with me. So they were forced to go, because he was stronger than they. They also had but little to say, for they knew themselves in a fault. The giant therefore drove them before him, and put them into his castle, into a very dark dungeon, nasty and stinking to the spirits of these 2 men. Here then they lay from Wednesday morning till Saturday night, without one bit of bread, or drop of drink, or light, or any to ask how they did. They were, therefore, here in evil case, and were far from friends and acquaintance. Psalm 88:18. Now in this place Christian had double sorrow, because it was through his unadvised counsel that they were brought into this distress. Now Giant Despair had a wife, and her name was Diffidence. So when he was gone to bed, he told his wife what he had done, to wit, that he had taken a couple of prisoners, and cast them into his dungeon for trespassing on his grounds. Then he asked her also what he had best do further to them. So she asked him what they were, whence they came, and whither they were bound, and he told her. Then she counselled him that when he arose in the morning, he should beat them without mercy. So when he arose, he getteth him a grievous crab-tree cudgel, and goes down into the dungeon to them, and there first falls to rating of them as if they were dogs, although they gave him never a word of distaste. Then he falls upon them and beats them fearfully, in such sort that they were not able to help themselves, or to turn them upon the floor. This done, he withdraws and leaves them there to condole their misery, and to mourn under their distress. So all that day they spent the time in nothing but sighs and bitter lamentations. The next night she, talking with her husband further about them, and understanding that they were yet alive, did advise him to counsel them to make away with themselves. So when morning was come, he goes to them in a surly manner as before, and perceiving them to be very sore with the stripes that he had given them the day before, he told them that since they were never like to come out of that place, their only way would be forthwith to make an end of themselves, either with knife, halter, or poison. For why, said he, should you choose to live, seeing it is attended with so much bitterness? But they desired him to let them go. With that he looked ugly upon them, and rushing to them, had doubtless made an end of them himself, but that he fell into one of his fits, for he sometimes in sunshiny weather fell into fits, and lost for a time the use of his hands, wherefore he withdrew and left them as before to consider what to do. Then did the prisoners consult between themselves whether it was best to take his counsel or no, and thus they began to discourse. Christian. Brother, said Christian, what shall we do? The life that we now live is miserable. For my part, I know not whether it is best to live thus, or to die out of hand. My soul chooseth strangling rather than life, and the grave is more easy for me than this dungeon. Job 7:15. Shall we be ruled by this giant? Hopeful. Indeed, our present condition is dreadful, and death would be far more welcome to me than thus for ever to abide. But yet, let us consider. The Lord of the country to which we are going hath said, Thou shalt do no murder. No, not to another man's person. Much more than are we forbidden to take his counsel to kill ourselves. Besides, he that kills another can but commit murder upon his body. But for one to kill himself is to kill body and soul at once. And moreover, my brother, thou talkest of ease in the grave. But hast thou forgotten the hell whither for certain the murderers go? For no murderer hath eternal life, etc. And let us consider again that all the law is not in the hand of giant Despair. Others, so far as I can understand, have been taken by him as well as we, and yet have escaped out of his hands. Who knows but that God, who made the world, may cause that giant Despair may die, or that at some time or other he may forget to lock us in, or that he may in a short time have another of his fits before us, and may lose the use of his limbs. And if ever that should come to pass again, for my part, I am resolved to pluck up the heart of a man, and to try my utmost to get from under his hand. I was a fool that I did not try to do it before. But however, my brother, let us be patient and endure a while. The time may come that may give us a happy release. But let us not be our own murderers. With these words Hopeful at present did moderate the mind of his brother. So they continued together in the dark that day, in their sad and doleful condition. Well, towards evening the giant goes down into the dungeon again, to see if his prisoners had taken his counsel. But when he came there he found them alive, and truly alive was all. For now, what for want of bread and water, and by reason of the wounds they had received when he beat them, they could do little but breathe. But I say he found them alive, at which he fell into a grievous rage, and told them that seeing they had disobeyed his counsel, it should be worse with them than if they had never been born. At this they trembled greatly, and I think that Christian fell into a swoon. But coming a little to himself again, they renewed their discourse about the giant's counsel, and whether yet they had best take it or no. Now Christian again seemed for doing it, but Hopeful made his second reply as followeth. Hopeful. My brother, said he, rememberest thou not how valiant thou hast been heretofore? Apollyon could not crush thee, nor could all that thou didst hear, or see, or feel in the valley of the shadow of death. What hardship, terror, and amazement hast thou already gone through, and art thou now nothing but fears? Thou seest that I am in the dungeon with thee, a far weaker man by nature than thou art. Also this giant hath wounded me as well as thee, and hath also cut off the bread and water from my mouth, and with thee I mourn without the light. But let us exercise a little more patience. Remember how thou playedst the man at Vanity Fair, and was neither afraid of the chain nor cage, nor yet of bloody death. Wherefore let us, at least to avoid the shame that it becomes not a Christian to be found in, bear up with patience as well as we can. Now night being come again, and the giant and his wife being in bed, she asked him concerning the prisoners, and if they had taken his counsel, to which he replied, They are sturdy rogues. They choose rather to bear all hardships than to make away with themselves. Then said she, Take them into the castle yard tomorrow, and show them the bones and skulls of those that thou hast already dispatched, and make them believe, ere a week comes to an end, thou wilt tear them in pieces, as thou hast done their fellows before them. So when the morning was come, the giant goes to them again, and takes them into the castle yard, and shows them as his wife had bidden him. These, said he, were pilgrims, as you are, once, and they trespassed on my grounds, as you have done. And when I thought fit, I tore them in pieces. And so within 10 days I will do you, get you down to your den again. And with that he beat them all the way thither. They lay therefore all day on Saturday in a lamentable case as before. Now when night was come, and when Mrs. Diffidence and her husband the giant was got to bed, they began to renew their discourse of their prisoners, and withal the old giant wondered that he could neither by his blows nor counsel bring them to an end. And with that his wife replied, I fear, said she, that they live in hopes that some will come to relieve them, or that they have picklocks about them, by the means of which they hope to escape. And sayest thou so, my dear? Said the giant. I will therefore search them in the morning. Well, on Saturday about midnight they began to pray, and continued in prayer till almost break of day. Now a little before it was day, good Christian, as one half amazed, brake out into this passionate speech. What a fool, quoth he, am I, thus to lie in a stinking dungeon, when I may as well walk at liberty? I have a key in my bosom called Promise, that will, I am persuaded, open any lock in Doubting Castle. Then said Hopeful, That is good news, good brother. Pluck it out of thy bosom, and try. Then Christian pulled it out of his bosom, and began to try at the dungeon door, whose bolt, as he turned the key, gave back, and the door flew open with ease, and Christian and Hopeful both came out. Then he went to the outward door that leads into the castle yard, and with his key opened that door also. After he went to the iron gate, for that must be opened too. But that lock went desperately hard, yet the key did open it. They then thrust open the gate to make their escape with speed. But that gate, as it opened, made such a creaking that it waked Giant Despair, who hastily rising to pursue his prisoners, felt his limbs to fail, for his fits took him again, so that he could by no means go after them. Then they went on and came to the king's highway, and so were safe, because they were out of his jurisdiction. Now when they were gone over the stile, they began to contrive with themselves what they should do at that stile, to prevent those that shall come after from falling into the hands of Giant Despair. So they consented to erect there a pillar, and to engrave upon the side thereof this sentence: Over this stile is the way to Doubting Castle, which is kept by Giant Despair, who despiseth the king of the celestial country, and seeks to destroy his holy pilgrims. Many therefore that followed after read what was written, and escaped the danger. This done, they sang as follows: Out of the way we went, and then we found what 'twas to tread upon forbidden ground, and let them that come after have a care, lest heedlessness makes them as we to fare, lest they for trespassing his prisoners are, whose castle's Doubting, and whose name's Despair. End Part 1, the 7th stage. Part 1, the 8th stage. They went then till they came to the Delectable Mountains, which mountains belong to the Lord of that hill of which we have spoken before. So they went up to the mountains to behold the gardens and orchards, the vineyards and fountains of water, where also they drank and washed themselves, and did freely eat of the vineyards. Now there were on the tops of these mountains shepherds feeding their flocks, and they stood by the highway side. The pilgrims therefore went to them, and leaning upon their staffs, as is common with weary pilgrims when they stand to talk with any by the way, they asked, Whose delectable mountains are these, and whose be the sheep that feed upon them? The shepherds. These mountains are Emmanuel's land, and they are within sight of his city, and the sheep also are his, and he laid down his life for them. John 10:11 and 15. Christian. Is this the way to the celestial city? The shepherds. You are just in your way. Christian. How far is it thither? The shepherds. Too far for any but those who shall get thither indeed. Christian. Is the way safe or dangerous? The shepherds. Safe for those for whom it is to be safe, but transgressors shall fall therein. Hosea 14:9. Christian. Is there in this place any relief for pilgrims that are weary and faint in the way? The shepherds. The Lord of these mountains hath given us a charge not to be forgetful to entertain strangers. Hebrews 13:2. Therefore the good of the place is before you. I saw also in my dream that when the shepherds perceived that they were wayfaring men, they also put questions to them, to which they made answer as in other places, as, Whence came you, and how got you into the way? And, By what means have you so persevered therein? For but few of them that begin to come hither do show their face on these mountains. But when the shepherds heard their answers, being pleased therewith, they looked very lovingly upon them, and said, Welcome to the Delectable Mountains. The shepherds, I say, whose names were Knowledge, Experience, Watchful, and Sincere, took them by the hand, and had them to their tents, and made them partake of that which was ready at present. They said moreover, We would that you should stay here a while to be acquainted with us, and yet more to solace yourselves with the good of these delectable mountains. Then they told them that they were content to stay. So they went to their rest that night, because it was very late. Then I saw in my dream that in the morning the shepherds called up Christian and Hopeful to walk with them upon the mountains. So they went forth with them, and walked a while, having a pleasant prospect on every side. Then said the shepherds one to another, Shall we show these pilgrims some wonders? So when they had concluded to do it, they had them first to the top of a hill called Error, which was very steep on the farthest side, and bid them look down to the bottom. So Christian and Hopeful looked down, and saw at the bottom several men dashed all to pieces by a fall that they had had from the top. Then said Christian, What meaneth this? The shepherds answered, Have you not heard of them that were made to err, by hearkening to Hymenaeus and Philetus, as concerning the faith of the resurrection of the body? 2 Timothy 2:17 and 18. They answered, Yes. Then said the shepherds, Those that you see lie dashed in pieces at the bottom of this mountain are they, and they have continued to this day unburied, as you see, for an example to others to take heed how they clamber too high, or how they come too near the brink of this mountain. Then I saw that they had them to the top of another mountain, and the name of that is Caution, and bid them look afar off, which, when they did, they perceived, as they thought, several men walking up and down among the tombs that were there, and they perceived that the men were blind, because they stumbled sometimes upon the tombs, and because they could not get out from among them. Then said Christian, What means this? The shepherds then answered, Did you not see, a little below these mountains, a stile that led into a meadow on the left hand of this way?" They answered, "Yes." Then said the shepherds, "From that stile there goes a path that leads directly to Doubting Castle, which is kept by giant Despair. And these men," pointed to them among the tombs, "came once on pilgrimage, as you do now, even until they came to that same stile. And because the right way was rough in that place, they chose to go out of it into the meadow, and there were taken by giant Despair, and cast into Doubting Castle, where after they had a while been kept in the dungeon, he at last did put out their eyes, and led them among those tombs, where he has left them to wander to this very day, that the saying of the wise man might be fulfilled, He that wandereth out of the way of understanding shall remain in the congregation of the dead." Proverbs 21:16. Then Christian and Hopeful looked upon one another with tears gushing out, but yet said nothing to the shepherds. Then I saw in my dream that the shepherds had them to another place in a bottom, where was a door on the side of a hill, and they opened the door and bid them look in. They looked in therefore, and saw that within it was very dark and smoky. They also thought that they heard there a rumbling noise as of fire, and a cry of some tormented, and that they smelt the scent of brimstone. Then said Christian, "What means this?" The shepherds told them, "This is a byway to hell, a way that hypocrites go in at, namely, such as sell their birthright with Esau, such as sell their master with Judas, such as blaspheme the gospel with Alexander, and that lie and dissemble with Ananias and Sapphira his wife." Then said Hopeful to the shepherds, "I perceive that these had on them, even every one, a show of pilgrimage as we have now, had they not?" The shepherds, "Yes, and held it a long time too." Hopeful, "How far might they go on in pilgrimage in their day, since they, notwithstanding, were miserably cast away?" The shepherds, "Some farther, and some not so far as these mountains." Then said the pilgrims one to the other, "We had need to cry to the strong for strength." The shepherds, "Ay, and you will have need to use it, when you have it too." By this time the pilgrims had a desire to go forward, and the shepherds a desire they should. So they walked together towards the end of the mountains. Then said the shepherds one to another, "Let us here show the pilgrims the gates of the celestial city, if they have skill to look through our perspective glass." The pilgrims lovingly accepted the motion, so they had them to the top of a high hill called Clear, and gave them the glass to look. Then they tried to look, but the remembrance of that last thing that the shepherds had shown them made their hands shake, by means of which impediment they could not look steadily through the glass. Yet they thought they saw something like the gate, and also some of the glory of the place. Then they went away and sang, "Thus by the shepherds secrets are revealed, which from all other men are kept concealed. Come to the shepherds then, if you would see things deep, things hid, and that mysterious be." When they were about to depart, one of the shepherds gave them a note of the way. Another of them bid them beware of the flatterer. The third bid them take heed that they slept not upon enchanted ground. And the fourth bid them Godspeed. So I awoke from my dream. End Part 1, the 8th stage.